My prayer is that when we go back in the fall, that everybody isn't, hey, get your books open because you had this learning gap, but rather is to listen to our scholars and to take care of their social emotional needs, because it's been a difficult journey. When this crisis hit, like many others, we kind of had three immediate reactions. One was we have to make sure that the nutritional needs of our scholars and our families get met. The second one was how do we make sure that the academic growth of our students continues. And then third, and unfortunately probably this one should have been second, but third was how do we take care of the social emotional needs of our scholars. This has been such a hard time for children, obviously, with George Floyd's murder, with COVID, with loss as it relates to the disproportionality of COVID deaths, and just of the protests. And our scholars have so much that they want to express. My prayer is that when we go back in the fall, that everybody isn't, hey, get your books open because you had this learning gap, but rather is to listen to our scholars and to take care of their social emotional needs, because it's been a difficult journey. Our teachers, like many, rose to the challenge and would call families twice a week, and we started to create clubs, and so that was a good piece. When I think about the reopening safely, it's interesting with the other panelists, I didn't really realize until 2 weeks ago how school is so viewed by so many as childcare. And obviously it's a place of learning, obviously it's a place of social emotional growth, et cetera. But I was very concerned about how quickly we're working to reopen and how unbelievable and undoable some of the requests are as it relates to social distancing with children. Buses that had 3 to a seat are now supposed to have 12 on a yellow bus total. One-way hallways, half time in the school, half time being taught virtually. There's some pretty complicated dynamics as we're being encouraged to come back to school. We were so concerned about what this impact, because most of our children are Black and Latino, and most of our children are low income. We were so concerned about the disproportionate effect of this. Obviously, we worry about our scholars. We also worry, as other speakers have said, about the health of our families and of our scholars' families. And so we created a 172-step guide of what we think is going to be required to reopen safely. And when you look at some of the things, temperature checks, masks, one-way hallways, not utilizing media centers, choral areas, gyms, and other things, bus transportation, additional cleaning staff, additional supplies for scholars. When you start going down the list of what you would really need to do to execute this well, and that's just the operational side, that's not even the teaching of the children who are virtual and teaching the children who are at school. When you see what it's cost, we think it's going to be about $100,000 to $150,000 per school to actually uphold the guidelines that we're recommending. We've been very blessed when this crisis happened to get a lot of donations, to be creative with our title funds, and make sure that every one of our scholars now has older scholars have Chromebooks, younger scholars have iPads. Every home now has access to technology, and we have a help desk that's open 12 hours a day with multiple languages to help our families with any technological issues they have, or any issues they have when we're doing our virtual summer learning program right now for our scholars. I guess my hope and my prayer as we reopen is that, let me step back. In some of our districts, they're saying they're not going to help with the testing of staff or scholars, and obviously there's a health system to do that. They're saying that's the health system's piece. That's concerning to us. In some, they're saying they're not going to do temperature checks because the temperature checks have 20% false positives or what have you. I would just push everybody to make sure that as we drive to reopen, which seems to be driven by the economy, that we actually put our children's safety, our children's family safety, and the incredible teachers that commit to and staff that commit to our children, I hope we put them first.
This question is, how can we expect students to stay safe when they go back to school? Which I know is very open-ended, but if you could share some of your thoughts about how we can expect that.
I think it's very difficult. I mean, when you start at the point of transportation, as I shared, there aren't enough buses in America to bus if we're expecting 6 feet of social distance, 12 children to a bus. We usually have about 40, 45 on a bus. And so you can't afford it, and there aren't enough buses or bus drivers. But assuming that the bus company does a good job screening their staff and testing their staff, that masks are worn by bus drivers, that we're able to, as a nonprofit, secure enough resources to ensure all of our scholars have masks, and the younger scholars, we want them to have visors as well. We are going to be in a hybrid model, I believe, where 50% of our students are in school. Group A is in school for a week, and Group B is at home, getting learning delivered virtually, and then vice versa. So there is an opportunity to have, we're getting guidance 10 to 12 scholars per class, desks 6 feet apart, plexiglass in front of our teachers' desks. I mean, if you're in education, you love children, and so it's hard to think that you're not going to be able to give a high five or a hug or a pat on the back to the scholar that needs it. But if we want to keep everybody healthy, we're going to have to try that social distancing piece. I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to keep everybody safe, but we've tried to line up at least a process that gives us the best chance of staying safe as possible. We believe all scholars, teachers, vendors should be tested. And we believe that we are going to have to limit the amount of visitors. We have a lot of guest speakers who come in and do great things with our kids, and partnership groups. We think that's going to have to be limited to keep our scholars safe. So I'm being long-winded, but it's going to be a challenge, to be honest with you. And we're just trying to be as safe as we possibly can while servicing our children.
Could you expand a little bit on what kind of extra cleaning you might be thinking about doing, and if you all are planning on providing masks?
Yeah, so we're purchasing it now, because what we found with the PPE, with all the sanitizers and everything we're getting, is lined up to CDC guidelines, and we're moving on it now, because when we went to purchase the computers, that was early March, and we said, all right, we can have our kids on devices and what have you by April. It really took 3 months, 2.5 months to get to that place, because everybody else was making the same move. So I'd caution groups not to wait till the last second, or not to wait till our governors give us advice about how to do it, because you may not get your protective gear and your other hand sanitizers and your other CDC recommending cleaning supplies. You may not get that till late September, October, which is obviously far too late. So we're using funds, both philanthropic and others, to help purchase the supply and the volume that we'll need. We had to increase our janitorial staff by basically 1.5 kind of more FTEs per campus, so that we could take care of the safety. Every one of our classrooms has outside it a kit of extra masks, of Lysol, of hand sanitizer, et cetera, et cetera. We shut off all water fountains, because babies like to put their mouths on the water fountains when they're drinking. So we had to shut off all water fountains as a precaution, and we're ordering water bottles for scholars. We're advising our scholars that ever since the beginning of school, children like to swap and share. Hey, I'm going to give you my apple for your bag of potato chips, or what have you. You can't do that anymore. Lunches will be delivered, but you can't share anything with anybody else at this point. So we're just trying to do as much of the common sense stuff, understanding that it's going to be a challenge. Scholars want to give one another a hug when they see them. They want to give their teacher a high five or a hug when they see them. It's going to be a challenge.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org, or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.